This is the fictional Mindbender. With the Acolyte finally over with, I thought it was time to reflect on what it meant overall and its influence on the fandom as well. I had deliberately chosen not to do a video on it because it's just too easy to do a video on every single episode and critique and make assumptions about it without having seen the entire thing as a whole. And quite frankly, there were too many other YouTube videos that were already doing that, and honestly I was just tired of the ranting on both sides. So I waited. And having said all that, I hear a lot of comparisons of it to The Last Jedi, and to be honest, I tend to largely agree with those comparisons. But at the same time, I don't agree, and feel it's a much deeper symbolism of how pop culture these days is a divide when it comes to how it sees icons, cultural icons, heroes, you get the idea, celebrities, all that. A lot of this comes from a debate that I had with a couple of friends a few weeks ago, both of whom were millennials, and one of them was a big Star Wars fan. So we were talking about movies and everything, and the topic of The Last Jedi came up. One of them thought it was a great movie, and that the reason why fans don't appreciate it was that they don't want their heroes to grow up. They basically want to keep them as a snow globe and just have them unchanging and whatnot, and that was just unrealistic and not what life was. And thus, it made them incapable of appreciating The Last Jedi's nuances as well. Moreover, he also primarily blamed this on Gen Xers and Boomers who were doing this. And this was because of how he believed they were the ones who were idolizing the character of Luke Skywalker, the crux of the divide in Star Wars. So, as a Gen Xer myself, I told him that the most hate I've seen from fans actually was coming from millennials, and not so much Gen Xers and Boomers. Mostly because many of them have better things to do, to be honest with you. But yes, there are Boomers and Gen Xers who are raging about it as well, so I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist. But at the same time, it was just too naive, I guess, to think that it was just one particular generation that was doing this. You can just type up Last Jedi or The Acolyte now, I guess, and you'll see that for yourself. See, like, the vast age differences of people who just don't like it or are complaining about it. Because, rage tubing is a thing right now, and if you want to get clicks and likes, you gotta start ranting and raving about someone or something in order to be noticed. It kind of sucks. But I am seeing a similar debate brought up with The Acolyte now, because of how it portrays the Jedi Order overall, or at least a small number of Jedi being fallible and even corrupt, though not outright evil. But I guess for many people, just showing them that corrupt, that they're gonna lie and cover up crimes, is enough. That is crossing a red line for them. Even beyond the Star Wars franchise, I could see a similar thing happening with House of the Dragon, in terms of how the show is portraying the Targaryen Civil War. From a war that was started over political scheming and intentional backstabbing, to just mistakes that were made along the way that just happened to snowball out of control. No one really meant to do it, it just kind of happened. But essentially, there's no real good and evil. There's no outright, I did it for this reason and that's it. There are no true heroes because they're all only human and should be seen as much after all. Not as these myths and legends and gods that parents and grandparents have made them out to be. There is certainly a truth to that point, I think. In the 80s, celebrities and movie heroes were looked upon through many lenses, but one of the biggest lenses was that of hero worship. It was a big thing in Hollywood at the time. People that seemed larger than life, even within the movie itself. Just look at the first Top Gun movie if you don't believe me. How they treat the character of Maverick, if you look at it objectively speaking through modern eyes, is borderline ridiculous. That everyone basically simps over him even people who've lost family, and they should be grieving over that, and instead they're feeling sorry for him. And throughout the 80s and 90s, we were kind of spoon-fed these manufactured gods for us to follow. And yes, Luke Skywalker was one of these gods, but not in terms of what George Lucas intended. But after Return of the Jedi came out, what pop culture made his legacy become. That is, Luke wasn't Rambo or the Terminator or Chuck Norris or even Han Solo. He was a kid who wanted to be more and got his chance, but made monumental mistakes along the way that nearly killed him several times. And by Return of the Jedi, he seems to have finally learned his lessons, overcoming the last of his flaws, the famous Skywalker anger. Yes, it's a thing. Never get a Skywalker mad. Any of them. But he spares his father's life, who had committed numerous atrocities and crimes for the Empire for 20-something years, and bring them back to the light side of the Force. And though it nearly killed him again, through his trials he matures to become a true Jedi Knight, with the Jedi themselves during his time being propped up as these mythical figures and paramounts of heroism. I wouldn't say Jesus level, but maybe Mount Olympus level, I guess you can say. And, full disclosure, this perception kind of continues into the expanded universe, even though it does show Luke and his friends with many flaws. But it still stays true to what the original trilogy represented, without changing too much of what happened. And this is what fans thought they would get with the prequels and the later sequels. A simple, easy to decipher tale of good and evil. Now, fast forward to what Disney did to Star Wars, and suddenly we get a different tone altogether. Though it was tried to be covered up in the typical flash and sounds of the Star Wars that we all know and love, the atmosphere was much darker, much cynical. The myths that we had grown up with were now being portrayed as failures. Han and Leia have split up and left a son in between them who has fallen to the dark side because Luke nearly kills him because suddenly he's afraid he's going to become evil. And that the Republic that they fought so hard to restore, and that we get this happy ending, in Return of the Jedi back in 1983, also falls apart to a new version of the Empire that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, sporting the same types of ships and outfits and masked villains with red lightsabers. I think there are two major influences at work here with Star Wars at this point. The first being past sins. Essentially, in my opinion, I think Kathleen Kennedy, who runs the franchise now, has made it quite clear that she has intended to make the franchise available to women, and that many girls were often mistreated and bullied because they were told it was a boys' franchise. And actually, I can testify to this. I've seen that happen. Even with Princess Leia being a major part of the story, it was still for boys only. Women don't like science fiction, much less Star Wars. And I think those experiences kind of created an old grudge or deep wound within Kathleen Kennedy, if I'm honest, and any other women in her circle who happen to feel that way and who are running Star Wars right now. And that anger towards that particular treatment, which is justified, by the way, and that justifiable anger, because treating anyone and bullying anyone is just flat out wrong, has kind of filtered its way into how they've handled the franchise, basically, and how they've handled fans who don't like what they've done with Star Wars, leading to a simplified outlook of who they're dealing with, not the nuance that is taking place and is more recognized now. The second influence that I see is the perceived generation gap. Now, I don't buy that argument because, again, a lot of rage tubers and rage Twittermongers are themselves millennials. Yet, it still goes without saying that many other millennials and Gen Zers don't share the same hero worship that their parents do. Sure, they had their heroes like Goku and Power Rangers growing up in the 90s, but they were also presented as being more human, struggling and often failing. Or to put it another way, they hate messiahs. People who are just pure and somehow automatically right and perfect, somehow. Okay, you might say, how is that different from the perception of Luke Skywalker, who himself was a consistent failure till he finally got it right in the last movie. Well, the way The Last Jedi puts it, to many millennials and zoomers who liked the movie, these flaws were outshone by the final legacy of the character. What they hear about is Luke Skywalker the hero, not Luke Skywalker the fuck-up. Just look at how massive the reception was with his appearance in the Mandalorian finale, and then compare that to the division from his appearance in The Last Jedi. It couldn't be more night and day. That half fandom wanted a more realistic take that reflected their skepticism and intelligence in how they wanted to see their heroes, not just blindly following them and believing that they're automatically perfect and good who make no mistakes. Thank you, Dune. And the other half, as one YouTuber put it, wants to return to the good old days with the upbeat action and talks about how the Force was shown before in the original trilogy and prequel trilogy, and for many Star Wars fans, even the extended universe. And the reaction to the Acolyte, coming full circle, has been a continuation of this division. By portraying the Jedi Order and the fall of Jedi Master Soul as being part of a series of cover-ups, the series for haters, demythologizing the Jedis as heroes. And that's even despite the prequels and the Clone Wars already showing that the Jedi were flawed. But those who like the show are willing to overlook its failings to get a better look at the Jedi Order through this story, through this interpretation of what is now considered canon. It's currently being argued that Disney Star Wars is trying to just ignore the haters and foster a new fandom and legacy to basically take the place of the old one who they're relying on just filtering out, basically. I don't know if that's true or not, but this is what I do know, is that how you receive Star Wars is going to be entirely based on how you believe heroes should be represented. If you believe that heroes should be uplifting and hopeful inspirations to inspire people to move forward, then chances are you're not going to like a lot of the modern portrayals of Star Wars heroes. However, if you are a person who believes that heroes should be more nuanced and more grayed out and more fleshed out as people rather than as idols and gods basically, then chances are you're going to enjoy the new Star Wars stuff. Either one's perfectly fine, just don't mistreat each other over it. This is the Fictional Mindbender, and you guys have a good day.